Many consider 1970 the last year of the true muscle car era, and one of the all-time best muscle cars is indisputably the Pontiac GTO. The GTO was introduced in the 1964 model year as an option on the Pontiac Tempest, where basically Pontiac put its larger 389 cubic inch V8, topped either by a 4-barrel carburetor or 3 2-barrel carburetors under hood, endowing the intermediate-sized Tempest with performance that had not yet been seen to date. The GTO became so successful that Pontiac continued with its production, and by 1970 the GTO had a well-earned reputation on the streets as one of the muscle cars to beat. For 1970, Pontiac advertisers capitalized on this overall success of the GTO, both within the showroom and at the drag strip, and named it the Humbler. Yes, that's right. For 1970 only, the GTO was known in its advertisements as the Humbler. In other words, the car to beat if you were going to go racing on the street or at the track. And there was good reason for it to be called the Humbler, because under hood in the GTOs, a number of high-performance V8s were offered. The base 400 cubic inch V8 by now made 350 horsepower and 445 pound-feet of torque, but you could also get a number of engine options that were even more performance-oriented. There was a 455 HO engine that went under hood that made 360 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. There was also a Ram Air 3 V8 that was a 400 cubic inch mill, making 366 horsepower and 445 pound-feet of torque. And top dog was a Ram Air 4 V8, 400 cubic inch, 370 horsepower, 445 pound-feet of torque engine. And many people believe that the Ram Air 3 and Ram Air 4 engines were heavily underrated by Pontiac in this era where insurance companies were really clamping down on higher performance vehicles. And that's pretty true. By most estimations, the Ram Air 4, which Pontiac rated at 370 gross horsepower, really made closer to about 420. And certainly the quarter-mile figures that came with the vehicle, namely that it could complete the quarter mile in about 13 and a half seconds at 105 miles an hour, seemed to suggest that it was indeed underrated for the time. Remember, this was a time period where tires weren't all that great and it was hard to put a lot of power to the ground, so breaking into the 13 seconds in the quarter mile was pretty gosh darn awesome for a stock vehicle. And of course, when you went down to your local Pontiac dealer to order a GTO, you could configure it largely as you wanted. Not only could you select from a number of different engine and transmission choices, both manual and automatic as an example, you could pick a number of options that you wanted on your GTO to make it your own. And while there were many cool options for the 1970 GTO, I have to say that at least in my mind, one of the coolest options on this car, and indeed across all Pontiacs in general throughout history, is an option that was offered only from November of 1969 to January of 1970, when, because it was so cool, it was pulled by GM's upper management. And they kind of tried to say that it was pulled because of federal government regulations, which may be true, but the fact of the matter was that GM's upper management really didn't like this. And that is the vacuum-operated exhaust option, or option code W73, that was offered only on 1970 GTOs that were produced, as I mentioned, from November of 1969 to January of 1970. The vacuum-operated exhaust was so cool that it in fact served as a harbinger of basically exhaust to come in the future. Today, it's relatively common on high-performance vehicles like Corvettes and even the Dodge Hellcat to have exhaust pipes that have separate butterfly valves that open, enabling more sound to be emitted through the exhaust and also helping them become more free-flowing. But this was an early system introduced in 1970 that if an owner wanted to make a little bit more noise, he or she pulled a control knob from underneath the dashboard, and in doing so, it activated a series of flaps in both mufflers that would effectively bypass the stock routing and churn out noises that were far more beautiful than what would be emitted if the exhaust were fully routed through the muffler. In other words, it basically allowed you to travel in quiet if you wanted through the stock internals of the muffler, or bypass those by pulling out the knob on the dash and getting a bit more burble both outside and inside the car. It was such a cool setup that Pontiac marketers actually created a commercial that specifically advertised this feature. The commercial had its own jingle, which you heard at the beginning of this segment, that noted the GTO was now officially the quote-unquote humbler. And in it, a younger gentleman is seen driving a 1970 GTO by a drive-in and pulling the exhaust flap and kind of circling the parking lot that has other high-performance vehicles and looking at them as though he can outrace them. It's a super cool commercial that was unfortunately pulled by Pontiac leadership as well because it had tones of racing and illegal activity. But the commercial survives today, and if you want to see it, go check out Osborne Tremaine's YouTube channel. He has it on there. You can watch it in full and restored. Interestingly, while the VOE was an option that was designed to kind of show your friends that you had the high performance mill underhood that could outrun them on the street or the drag strip, it was not offered on any GTO with Ram Air. So you could not get it on the Ram Air 3 or the Ram Air 4. You had to get it on any of the other engines. And by the way, only about 300 1970 GTOs came equipped with this option, in large part because it was available for such a limited period of time, just November of 1969 through January of 1970. But interestingly, there was one vehicle that was produced that had a Ram Air 4 engine and vacuum-operated exhaust from the factory. It's the exact car in the 1970 ad. Yes, that exact car, which made the circuit not only in that ad, but also in the magazines. That specific silver GTO has a Ram Air 4 engine and vacuum-operated exhaust. It has now been found and restored back to its original condition, thankfully, and has not been lost to history. You can also see this display here of how the vacuum-operated exhaust actually worked. And here's another picture of the vacuum servo that was part of the muffler. You can see the vacuum line going to it. That is what would activate the movement internal to the muffler, redirecting the exhaust gas flow and changing the sound of the exhaust. Let's now listen to a video of the exhaust both with the flap open and with it closed, so you can hear the difference that this vacuum-operated exhaust made when a driver would select to have the noisier exhaust. If that's not one of the coolest options that Pontiac ever offered, I don't know what is. It's just a shame that so few cars were outfitted with that vacuum-operated exhaust and that it was canned relatively shortly after introduction. Again, it's a setup that's used on many cars in modern day, at least performance cars, so that owners don't always have to listen to the drone of their engine if they don't want to, but when they step on it, chances are they want to hear a little bit of a burble. In any case, hope you enjoyed this spotlight on Pontiac's vacuum-operated exhaust. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.